The freezing night was silent, except for the sound of weak, limping footsteps. A golden retriever, battered and injured, dragged itself through the snow, but despite its pain, it never stopped. Where was she going? And why did she return to the same place every night? Jack, a struggling single father, didn't know that rescuing this dog would change his life forever. But what was she hiding? If you love stories of kindness and second chances, consider subscribing for more. Jack Dawson had never been a man of luxury. At 47, his life was a series of long, grueling shifts at the lumberyard, his hands calloused from years of heavy lifting. He was a broad-shouldered man, slightly hunched from labor, with streaks of silver in his once dark hair. Deep lines carved his face, not just from age, but from the weight of responsibility he had carried alone for too long. His wife had passed away 6 years ago, leaving him to raise their son, Ethan, on his own. The loss had left him quieter, sterner, but never cruel. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes, especially when it came to his boy. Ethan, now 12, was the only reason Jack kept pushing forward. He was a lanky kid, still growing into his limbs, with a head full of unruly brown curls and a sharp mind that always seemed to be working on something. Unlike Jack, who had learned to keep his emotions locked away, Ethan was full of life, constantly asking questions, eager to see the good in everything. The two of them lived in a small, worn-down house at the edge of town. It wasn't much, but Jack did his best to make it a home. Tonight, after another exhausting day, Jack walked home beneath a sky heavy with winter clouds. The streets were slick with the remnants of melting snow, the air biting against his skin. His boots scuffed against the pavement as he adjusted the weight of his work bag on his shoulder. He was tired, his back ached, and all he wanted was to get home, maybe reheat some leftover soup and sit with Ethan before bed. But as he turned onto his street, he saw something in the dim glow of a street lamp. A dog, curled up on the frozen pavement near an alleyway. At first, he thought it was just another stray. The town had plenty of them, animals left behind when their owners moved away, or simply stopped caring. But as he got closer, he noticed the way the dog's sides rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. She was a golden retriever, her thick coat matted with dirt and streaked with dried blood. One of her front legs was tucked awkwardly beneath her body, swollen at the joint, as if she had been struck or thrown. Despite the obvious pain, her head lifted slightly at Jack's approach, her deep brown eyes locking onto his. There was no fear in them, no aggression, just exhaustion. And something else. Something that looked like determination. Jack exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. He didn't need this. He could barely afford to take care of himself and Ethan, let alone a wounded dog. But then he saw the slight tremor in her frame, the way she tried to move but couldn't, and before he could stop himself, he was crouching beside her. "You don't look like you're doing too good," he muttered. The dog let out a soft, pained whimper, her tail twitching once. Jack sighed. He knew himself too well. If he walked away now, he wouldn't be able to sleep. And in this cold, with that injury, she wouldn't make it through the night. With slow, careful movements, he slipped his hands beneath her, mindful of her injured leg. She barely protested, just let out a low breath as he lifted her. She was lighter than she should have been. Too thin, like she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. By the time he got home, Ethan was already at the door, peering out with wide eyes. "Dad, what?" "Help me get a blanket," Jack grunted as he stepped inside. Ethan scrambled to obey, disappearing into the small hallway before returning with an old fleece blanket. Jack laid the dog down on the kitchen floor, gently wrapping her in the warmth. Ethan knelt beside her, eyes full of curiosity and concern. "Where did she come from?" "Found her outside," Jack said, rolling his shoulders, trying to work out the stiffness. "She's hurt." Ethan reached out hesitantly, brushing his fingers against the dog's fur. "She's pretty," Jack huffed. "She's filthy." Ethan grinned. "Still pretty." The dog let out a low sigh, as if she agreed. Jack knelt down, assessing her injury again. The swelling around her leg was bad, but he didn't think it was broken. At least, not completely. He grabbed an old dish towel, soaked it in warm water, and began cleaning the dirt and dried blood from her fur. She barely flinched, just watched him with tired eyes. "What do you think happened to her?" Ethan asked softly. Jack shook his head. "Could have been anything. Maybe hit by a car. Maybe someone hurt her." Ethan's jaw tightened. He hated the idea of people being cruel to animals. "Can we keep her?" Jack paused. He knew that question was coming. "Ethan, we can't afford a dog," he said, though his voice lacked its usual firmness. Ethan pressed his lips together, but Jack could see the hope still lingering in his eyes. "We'll figure it out," Ethan said after a moment. Jack sighed, wiping his hands on his jeans. The dog watched them, tail giving the smallest wag, as if she understood she was safe here. "What should we call her?" Ethan asked. Jack hesitated, then glanced at the dog's golden fur, the way it caught the kitchen light despite the dirt and grime. "Luna," he said finally. Ethan smiled. "Luna, I like it." The name seemed to fit, and when Ethan said it again, softer this time, the dog let out a quiet huff, almost like approval. Jack exhaled, shaking his head. "She stays for the night. We'll see after that." But as he stood up, stretching out the stiffness in his back, he already knew. He wasn't the type of man who could turn away a creature in need. And besides, something about Luna felt different. The next morning, Jack woke early, expecting to find Luna still wrapped up in the blanket where they had left her. But as he stepped into the kitchen, he stopped short. The blanket was there. Luna was not. Jack's stomach dropped. He glanced at the front door. It was shut, locked. He turned toward the back. Sure enough, the old screen door leading to the yard was ajar, just enough for a dog to slip through. Ethan came stumbling in, rubbing his eyes. "Where's Luna?" Jack grabbed his coat, already heading for the door. "That's what I'm about to find out." Jack had always believed that once something was gone, it was gone for good. Life had taught him that lesson in the hardest way possible. His wife, Sarah, had walked out of their house one morning and never returned, taken by a sudden illness that left him with nothing but memories and the enormous weight of raising their son alone. Since then, he had stopped expecting anything to come back. So, when Luna disappeared the morning after he and Ethan had taken her in, he assumed she was gone for good. But then, the next night, as Jack sat in his chair with a cup of lukewarm coffee, there was a sound. Soft, hesitant scratching at the front door. Ethan, who had been fidgeting with his schoolwork at the kitchen table, whipped his head around. "Dad," he breathed, eyes wide. Jack set his coffee down and crossed the room. When he pulled the door open, there she was, Luna, standing weakly on the porch, her golden fur damp with frost, her breath misting in the cold. Despite her exhaustion, she held herself with quiet determination, her deep brown eyes searching his face, as if checking to see if he would still let her in. Jack sighed. "What are you doing, girl?" Luna didn't answer, of course, but she stepped inside as soon as he moved aside. Ethan was on the floor next to her in an instant, running his hands over her fur. "She came back," he whispered, as if he still couldn't believe it. Jack shut the door and watched, as Luna curled up in the same blanket they had given her the night before. It was as if she had never left at all, but when he woke the next morning, she was gone, and the next night she returned. It became a pattern. Luna would vanish as soon as the sun rose, and every evening just after dark, she would be there, waiting at their doorstep. At first, Jack thought maybe she was just restless. Strays had their habits. Maybe she had a place she liked to roam, a routine she had before they took her in. But then Ethan noticed something odd. "She's not eating much," he pointed out one evening, as Luna nosed at the bowl of food Jack had set out, but only took a few bites before turning away. Jack frowned. He hadn't paid much attention before, but Ethan was right. Luna wasn't eating like a dog who had spent all day wandering the streets. And there was something else, too. "Look at this," Ethan whispered the next night, crouching beside the dog and pointing. Luna had something clutched gently between her jaws, a small scrap of bread. She dropped it on the floor, but didn't eat it. Jack narrowed his eyes. "Where'd you get that?" he murmured. Luna just flicked an ear and looked toward the door. The next night, it was the same. Another piece of food. This time, a bit of old cooked meat, dry at the edges. Ethan's voice was hushed but urgent. "She's taking food somewhere." Jack watched the dog carefully, his mind working through the possibilities. She wasn't eating for herself. She was bringing food back. But for what? For who? Ethan looked up at him, eyes bright with realization. "Dad, we have to follow her." Jack let out a slow breath. He had been dreading this moment, but deep down, he knew Ethan was right. There was only one way to find out the truth. He glanced at Luna, her tired but determined face, the way she positioned herself near the door, as if waiting for the right moment to leave. "All right," he said finally, rolling his shoulders. "We wait until she goes, and we stay quiet." Ethan grinned. "Deal!" And so, that night, they followed her. Jack moved carefully, his boots crunching softly against the frost-dusted pavement, as he and Ethan trailed behind Luna. The dog limped ahead, her golden fur barely visible in the dim glow of a distant street lamp. Despite her injury, she moved with purpose, never hesitating at intersections, never looking back. Jack had always trusted his instincts, and right now, every one of them screamed that this wasn't normal stray behavior. Luna wasn't just wandering. She was leading them somewhere. Ethan stayed close to his father, his breath coming out in small puffs of condensation in the cold night air. His excitement was palpable, but Jack could sense something else beneath it. Curiosity, but also unease. They had entered an older part of town, the kind of place people only went when they had nowhere else left. The buildings here were abandoned, their walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti. A few old streetlights flickered weakly, casting long, shifting shadows across the cracked sidewalks. Jack's gut tightened. He had seen places like this before. Nothing good ever happened in places like this. Luna finally turned into a narrow alleyway between two crumbling brick buildings. It was dark, barely illuminated by the weak moonlight overhead. The walls on either side were covered in layers of grime, and the ground was littered with broken wood, old newspapers, and scattered trash. A rusted metal dumpster sat near the entrance, its lid askew. Jack hesitated. This was not where he had expected her to lead them. Luna, however, didn't hesitate. She limped forward, weaving past a pile of discarded wooden pallets, before slipping into the shadows at the far end of the alley. Ethan tugged on Jack's sleeve. "Dad, look!" Jack followed his son's gaze. Luna wasn't just passing through. She had disappeared behind a stack of old crates, squeezing herself into a space so small it was nearly invisible. Jack narrowed his eyes. He stepped forward, carefully kneeling beside the pile of crates. He could hear Ethan shifting behind him, barely breathing as he strained to see. Jack reached out, pushing one of the wooden slats aside just enough to peer through. What he saw made his breath hitch. A small dark space, the faintest movement, a soft, barely audible whimper. His pulse quickened. He leaned in further, his eyes adjusting to the dim light, and that's when he saw it. Tucked into the furthest, coldest corner of the alley, hidden between the crates, was something small, something alive. A tiny bundle of golden fur. Luna shifted, nudging at the shape with her nose, letting out a low, reassuring whine. The shape trembled but didn't move much, its breathing shallow and unsteady. Ethan's grip on Jack's sleeve tightened. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad, she wasn't coming back for a person." Jack swallowed, his throat tight. Ethan exhaled shakily, eyes wide with realization. She was coming back for her baby. Jack barely breathed as he knelt beside the pile of crates, his fingers brushing against the rough, damp wood. The alley was silent except for the faint whimpering that came from the shadows where Luna stood, her body partially blocking whatever lay hidden in the darkness. Her golden fur, though dirty and matted, still caught the dim light filtering in from the distant street lamp, casting a soft glow around her frame. Ethan crouched beside him, his breath quick and shallow. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of excitement and concern. "Dad," he whispered, "we have to help." Jack reached forward, gripping the edge of a broken crate. The wood splintered under his rough hands as he pried it back, revealing a small, hollow space beneath the stacked debris. His heart clenched at what he saw. Huddled in the corner, pressed against the cold concrete wall, was a tiny golden retriever puppy. The pup was barely more than a few weeks old, its fragile body trembling from the night air. Its fur, though the same soft golden shade as Luna's, was dull and dirty, clinging to its thin frame. Every sharp rib was visible beneath its skin, and its large, round eyes blinked up at them, glassy and unfocused. It was weak, too weak to even lift its head properly. Luna let out a soft whine and nudged the puppy gently with her nose. The pup gave a pitiful little squeak, but barely moved. Jack exhaled slowly. Ethan gasped. "She was hiding him," he murmured, his voice almost reverent. "She's been taking care of him this whole time?" Jack felt a weight settle deep in his chest. It all made sense now. Why Luna had kept leaving, why she hadn't eaten much, why she had kept coming back. "She's been bringing him food," Jack muttered, mostly to himself. He thought back to the scraps Luna had carried home each night, the way she had taken only small bites before slipping away. She hadn't been feeding herself. She had been feeding him. Ethan's eyes darted to Luna, then back to the pup. "That's why she kept running off," he whispered. "She wasn't leaving us. She was just making sure he was okay." Jack swallowed hard. He had seen plenty of desperate things in his lifetime. People stealing food, animals scrounging for scraps, parents sacrificing for their kids. But this was something else. Luna, despite being injured, despite being abandoned herself, had done everything she could to keep her baby alive. Jack ran a hand down his face. His body ached from the long day, but none of that mattered anymore. Ethan reached out hesitantly, his fingers hovering over the puppy's frail form. "Can I pick him up?" Jack hesitated. "Slowly," he warned. Ethan moved with careful hands, gently sliding his arms under the pup's tiny body. The moment he lifted him, the little thing let out a soft, barely there whimper, more of a breath than a cry. "He's so light," Ethan murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Jack reached over, running his rough fingers over the pup's fur. It was cold, too cold, and far too thin. "This one wouldn't have lasted much longer," Jack muttered, his jaw tightening. Luna, watching them closely, whined again, shifting anxiously on her feet. She limped slightly as she moved, clearly still in pain from her own injury. "She's worried we'll take him away," Ethan realized. Jack exhaled. He could see it, the protective glint in Luna's tired eyes, the way her ears flicked back with uncertainty. She didn't know if she could trust them yet. Jack met her gaze and spoke softly. "We're not going to hurt him," he murmured. "We just want to help." Luna tilted her head slightly, her nose twitching. She stepped forward, hesitating for only a second before leaning in to sniff Ethan's arms, where the pup lay curled against his chest. She gave a small, tentative lick to the puppy's head, then pulled back, her tail giving the faintest wag. Ethan grinned. "She knows we're helping." Jack exhaled through his nose. Maybe. But the truth was, they couldn't just leave it at that. Luna had risked everything to keep her pup alive, but out here, alone, they wouldn't survive much longer. Jack shifted, cracking his knuckles as he stood. "We have to get them out of here." Ethan's face lit up, hopeful. "You mean, take them home?" Jack hesitated. He could barely afford to keep the lights on. They had bills stacked on the kitchen table, groceries that ran out too fast, and a house that barely had enough space as it was. 2 dogs, one of them injured, the other barely clinging to life, weren't exactly part of the plan. But then he looked at Luna, at the way she watched them carefully, at the way she had fought for her pup despite everything. Jack exhaled slowly. There really wasn't a choice at all. Jack tightened his grip on the puppy in Ethan's arms as they stepped out of the alley. The night air felt colder now, the quietness unsettling. Luna trotted close to them, her limp still noticeable, but she stayed alert, her ears twitching at every distant sound. Jack didn't like this part of town. The buildings were old, abandoned, their broken windows like empty eyes watching their every move. The streetlights barely worked, flickering weakly as if struggling to stay alive. This wasn't a place for anyone, let alone a defenseless dog and her pup. They had to get home. But as soon as they reached the edge of the alley, a voice cut through the stillness. "Well, I'll be damned." Jack stopped cold. He felt Ethan stiffen beside him, his small hands tightening around the fragile body of the puppy. Luna froze, her tail dropping, her entire frame going rigid. From the shadows of a rusted-out truck, a man stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, though not in the way of a man who worked hard. His build carried a roughness, a weight of years spent in fights and bad decisions. His dark hair was greasy, pulled back into a loose ponytail, and his unshaven face was lined with deep creases, the kind carved by bitterness rather than age. His clothes were old, a battered leather jacket hanging loosely over a stained t-shirt, jeans worn through at the knees. Jack recognized the type, a man who took what he wanted and didn't think twice about the damage left behind. The man's sharp eyes locked onto Luna, his mouth curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Well, look at you. I thought you'd be dead by now." Luna let out a low growl. Ethan shifted closer to Jack. "Dad," he whispered, barely audible. Jack put a steadying hand on his son's shoulder, but kept his gaze fixed on the man. "You know her?" The man scoffed, stepping closer. "Course I do. That's my dog. Jack's muscles tensed. She doesn't look like yours anymore. The man let out a dry chuckle. Yeah? And what? You think she's yours? His gaze flicked down to Ethan, then to the puppy in his arms. His smirk widened. Well, ain't that interesting? Jack's jaw tightened. She was abandoned. The man shrugged. So, things get old, get broken, not my problem. Ethan sucked in a breath, but Jack shook his head slightly, warning him to stay quiet. The man continued, his voice laced with mockery. Didn't think she had it in her to survive. Must have been a real fighter, huh? His smirk faded, his eyes narrowing slightly. Guess that means I got some unfinished business. Jack's stomach nodded. He knew what was coming. The man nodded toward Luna, his tone turning hard. I'll take her back now. Jack didn't move. No, you won't. The man's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Listen, buddy, I don't know what little story you're telling yourself, but she's mine. Always has been. His gaze flicked to the puppy again. And that one? That's money right there. Jack felt his pulse hammer against his ribs. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He could feel Ethan pressing closer to his side, his small frame tense, protective over the fragile creature in his arms. She's not for sale, Jack said evenly. The man's expression darkened. She ain't yours to decide that. Jack met his gaze, unflinching. You left her to die. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The man's smirk returned, but this time it was colder, more dangerous. I left her because she was useless to me, he said. Now she's not. Jack could feel the situation shifting. He wasn't dealing with someone who saw Luna as a pet. This man had never cared about her. She was property, nothing more. And now that he knew she had survived, that she had a pup, Jack knew exactly what he wanted. The man took a step forward. Jack didn't move, didn't blink. You gonna hand him over? The man said, his voice lowering. Or are we gonna have a problem? Jack clenched his fists. He wasn't handing them over, no matter what happened next. Jack stood his ground, his hands clenched at his sides, his breath slow and controlled. The man in front of him, Luna's former owner, was waiting for a reaction, waiting for Jack to back down, to fold under the threat in his voice. Ethan held the puppy tighter against his chest, his small frame rigid with fear and defiance. Luna, despite her injuries, stood protectively in front of them, her golden fur bristling. The man's smirk deepened. You don't want to start trouble, old man. I got papers on that dog. You take her, that's theft. And theft? He let out a low chuckle. That's a crime. Jack's jaw tightened. The bastard was right. If Luna was chipped, if her ownership was still legally in his name, then Jack had no legal right to her. If this man called the cops, Jack could lose her. Could lose both of them. Ethan turned to him, eyes desperate. Dad, he whispered, we can't let him take them. Jack exhaled slowly. He wasn't the kind of man who looked for fights, but he also wasn't the kind of man to let an innocent life, let alone two, be dragged back into hell. He met the man's stare head on. You don't want the cops involved. The man's smile faltered. The hell I don't. Jack tilted his head slightly. You sure about that? His voice was calm, measured, but laced with an edge of warning. The man's expression flickered. Just a moment, just enough for Jack to see it. Doubt. Jack took a slow step forward. Because if you call them, I'll tell them exactly what they'll find when they check up on you. A dog that was abandoned, injured, starving. A puppy left to die in an alley. And if they dig deeper? His eyes narrowed. I wonder what else they'll find. The man's fingers twitched. You don't know shit. Jack smiled coldly. Don't I? Ethan suddenly tugged at Jack's sleeve, his voice urgent but quiet. Dad, we should report him. Jack glanced down at his son. Ethan's face was set with determination. If he's done this before, if he's done worse, then we have to. Jack hesitated. He had spent most of his life trying to stay out of other people's business. He was a working man, a man who kept his head down, did what needed doing, and didn't pick fights he couldn't win. But then he looked at Luna, standing stiff, her body tense, ready to fight to the death if she had to. And the tiny puppy in Ethan's arms, its ribs too sharp, its breathing too weak. Jack clenched his jaw. Ethan was right. Jack turned back to the man, whose smirk was now a thin, nervous line. I'm going to the authorities, Jack said simply. The man's face darkened. You really think they'll listen to you? Jack shrugged. Let's find out. The man's eyes flickered, calculating, weighing his options. Jack could see it now, could smell it. This wasn't just about Luna and her pup. This wasn't the first time this man had done something like this. Jack turned, keeping Ethan close, keeping Luna close. The man didn't move, didn't stop them. But as Jack walked away, he felt the man's glare burning into his back. Jack didn't stop until they were out of the alley, out of the shadows, back into the glow of the streetlights. Only then did Ethan let out a breath, his arms still wrapped protectively around the puppy. "What now?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter now, the adrenaline wearing off. Jack didn't hesitate. "Now, we make sure he never does this again." The next morning, Jack drove straight to the local Animal Welfare and Protection Agency. The building was small, tucked between a bakery and a laundromat, but it had a purpose. Posters lined the windows, some showing missing pets, others advertising adoption events. A sign on the door read, "Report abuse. We can help." Jack pushed inside, Ethan at his side, Luna walking slowly but steadily beside them. The woman at the front desk looked up. She was in her late 50s, tall and thin, with silver hair pulled into a loose bun. Her name tag read, Margaret. Her sharp blue eyes flicked between Jack, Ethan, and Luna before her lips pressed into a thin line. "Looks like you've got a story to tell." Jack nodded. "Yeah, we do." Margaret gestured to a set of chairs. "Come on back." They explained everything. Margaret listened intently, barely blinking, occasionally jotting down notes. When Jack mentioned the man's history with Luna, his treatment of her, his attitude, the way he spoke about selling her, her expression hardened. When Jack finished, Margaret leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "You did the right thing coming here." Jack exhaled, relief washing over him. Margaret reached for her phone. "We have investigators. If this guy's involved in illegal breeding or abuse, we'll find out." Ethan sat forward. "And if he is?" Margaret's eyes darkened. "Then we make sure he never lays a hand on another dog again." It took 3 days, 3 days of waiting. 3 days of Jack wondering if he had made the right call. 3 days of Ethan refusing to let the puppy out of his sight. Then, on the 4th day, a uniformed officer knocked on Jack's door. The officer was in his mid-40s, with a sturdy build and a serious expression. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming under the morning sun. He introduced himself as Officer Grant, and when Jack let him in, his first words were, "You were right." Jack felt the tension in his chest loosen slightly. "About what?" Grant crossed his arms. "That man, his name's Tom Riker, and he's got a record." Jack's stomach dropped. "What kind of record?" Grant exhaled. "Multiple reports of animal cruelty. Evidence of illegal breeding operations. We got enough from your statement and a few anonymous tips to send in a welfare check. What we found?" He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "It wasn't good." Ethan's eyes widened. "So, what happens now?" Grant straightened. "He's being formally investigated. Right now, he's in custody. And with the charges stacking up, he's not getting those dogs back. Not now, not ever." Jack let out a slow breath. Ethan looked down at Luna and the tiny pup, who was curled up asleep in his lap. "So, they're safe?" Grant nodded. "They're yours now, if you want them." Jack didn't need to think. He looked at Luna, at the way she sat beside him, trusting him, at the pup in Ethan's arms, who had finally stopped shivering. He knew what his answer was. The morning sun streamed through the small kitchen window, casting a soft glow over the worn wooden table where Ethan sat, gently stroking the golden fur of the tiny puppy curled up in his lap. The house was quiet, aside from the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the rhythmic sound of Luna's tail thumping softly against the linoleum as she lay nearby, watching her son with quiet contentment. Jack stood by the stove, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. He was exhausted. His body ached from the tension of the past few days, and his mind still reeled from everything that had happened. But for the first time in years, his home didn't feel empty. Ethan grinned down at the puppy, his fingers gently scratching behind its tiny ears. "I think I got the perfect name for him." Jack raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of coffee. "Oh yeah?" Ethan nodded. "Max." Jack considered it for a moment, then glanced at the small golden pup whose bright eyes blinked up at them, still weak but full of quiet determination. He had survived so much, and yet he was still here. Jack nodded. Max! Sounds right. Ethan beamed. Yeah, he's gonna be a fighter, just like his mom. Luna, hearing the words, lifted her head slightly, her ears twitching before she let out a soft huff, as if approving the name. Jack chuckled and leaned against the counter, watching his son with a rare sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, Ethan looked happy. Not just the surface-level joy of a kid playing with a dog, but something deeper, a sense of belonging. Jack had spent years just getting by, working long hours, keeping his head down, making sure Ethan had a roof over his head and food on the table. But in all that struggle, he had never realized how much they had been missing. Until now. Can we take them outside? Ethan asked suddenly, his excitement bubbling over. I bet Max has never felt grass before. Jack smirked, shaking his head at his son's energy. All right, but take it slow, he's still pretty weak. Ethan nodded eagerly and scooped Max up carefully, holding him close as he made his way to the backyard. Luna followed closely behind, her limp still noticeable but less severe after the rest and care she had received. Jack grabbed his coat and stepped outside after them. The yard wasn't much, just a patch of overgrown grass, a few old chairs that had seen better days, and a wooden fence that could use some repairs. But it was home. And now, it was theirs. Ethan set Max down gently in the grass. At first, the pup hesitated, sniffing at the unfamiliar texture beneath his tiny paws. Then, cautiously, he took a wobbly step forward, his ears twitching with curiosity. Luna stood close, watching him intently, her body tense but her tail wagging slightly. She was still a mother first, still protective, still ready to step in if needed. But then something happened. Max let out a tiny, excited yip and took another step. Then another. And suddenly he was stumbling forward in an uncoordinated but joyful sprint, his little legs barely keeping up with his enthusiasm. Ethan let out a laugh, chasing after him, his voice full of life. Jack stayed back, watching the scene unfold. The boy, the pup, the mother dog who had fought so hard to protect her child. Luna sat down beside him, her eyes never leaving her son. Jack knelt down, running a hand gently over her fur. You did good, he murmured. Luna turned her head slightly, looking up at him with those deep, knowing eyes. Then she let out a slow, contented sigh and leaned against his leg. For the first time in years, Jack felt something settle inside him. Something that had been missing since the day Sarah died. Something he hadn't realized he still had room for. A family. And as he watched Ethan and Max tumble through the grass, the sound of laughter filling the air, Jack knew that somehow, against all odds, they had found their way home. Sometimes, miracles come in the most unexpected ways. Luna wasn't just another stray left to fend for herself. She was a mother fighting against all odds, led by a love so strong that nothing, not even pain or hunger, could stop her. And in her journey, she found kindness, a new home, and a second chance. This story reminds us that no act of love goes unnoticed in the eyes of God. He works through the most ordinary moments, through a man who wasn't looking for a dog, but found a family, through a boy whose heart was open to love, and through a mother dog who never gave up on her child. God's grace is often quiet, found in the smallest acts of kindness, the choices we make to protect and care for those who cannot fight for themselves. Jack didn't know he was part of a greater plan when he picked Luna up from that cold street, but God knew, just as he watches over each of us, guiding us even when we don't realize it. Perhaps you too have experienced a moment like this, a time when love, faith, or even an unexpected friendship changed your life. If you have, we'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who needs a reminder that love and kindness can change everything. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to our channel for more stories that bring warmth and hope. May God bless you, may He guide you in kindness, and may His love surround you wherever you go. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.